Classes in session. Welcome to Unlearn 16 classes in session, guys. Today, I can't believe it, actually. I have the Honorable Kathleen Wynne, former Premier of Ontario, sitting right in front of me, willing to talk to me. I still can't believe it, and I'm sweating a little bit. Welcome so much. Well, look, I can't even talk anymore. Welcome so much. What kind of a teacher am I? Thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Happy to do it, Joanne. Looking forward to the conversation.
I'm excited. I'm very excited. My text message back and forth was, we're just going to take an hour and fix the political system. So we got 60 minutes and we just need to push through and get her done.
Absolutely.
Before, I would love to talk about today. I want to talk about the past. I want to talk about the future. I want to talk about the whole gambit. Can I ask, maybe if you can give our listeners, I have a lot of listeners from the United States, maybe give a bit of a synopsis of your career and maybe some of the highlights, some of the not so highlights, and what it is to be Premier of Ontario. I try to compare it for my US followers so they get a concept of what our political system looks like, but I'm sure you do it 10 times better than I. So.
I always say that being the Premier of a province in Canada is like being a governor, but you don't get a mansion.
What a ripoff.
There is no mansion.
No.
Yeah. So I began this journey as a young mom. I'm 69 now, and I sort of started out doing this when I was like under 40. Ran for the school board in the part of Toronto that I lived in. With my kids. I was involved in local education politics. That's really what drove me, was publicly funded education. I have a master's of education. My whole career has been in education in one way or another. I worked as a mediator. I trained teachers. I taught adult education. So I have worked in education, or I worked in education until I got involved in politics. And the way I got involved was I ran for school trustee. I lost that election by 72 votes in 1994. And then what happened in Ontario was a very conservative premier named Mike Harris was elected. And really my life changed because he undermined the publicly funded education system. He undermined the relationship between the province and municipalities. And so I had to be even more of an activist than I already was, and I needed to get involved. And that was my path to provincial politics. And in and around all of that, I was in the process of coming out. I came out in 1990. Oh, wow. Yeah, okay. I came out when I was 37. And so my partner, Jane, and I, and my 3 kids and their dad were working out our living arrangements. So there was a lot going on in 1990 to 2000. Yeah.
Oh my, you know what's so funny? So in 1994, I was in my OAC year. Again, for listeners, Ontario used to have grade 13. And my mom was a nurse for her whole life. So Mike the Knife, by the way, that was his nickname. He just slashed and amalgamated and slashed so many public services and gutted so much from education and from healthcare. I started seeing the cuts in my high school that year. Yeah. I felt, and the initial cuts were very much extracurricularly based. So yes. Like sports programs and music programs and stuff like that. Those were sort of the first to go. And I remember feeling that and seeing that. And, you know, you're a kid, you're naive or whatever, not thinking much of it. And then soon thereafter, I remember they shut down Wellesley Hospital because they amalgamated and whatever. My mom got laid off, which was insane because she'd been a nurse forever and had to switch hospital. So it's so funny that you're saying that, because I'm starting to feel that push. I'm a little bit older than you were, but I'm starting to feel that push, and for very, very similar reasons.
Good. Yeah, and exactly.
Funnily enough, all those boys still chat.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Federally and provincially. So you get into politics, and so it gives you this push. You get elected first as a trustee, and then when are you do you go right into provincial, or did you start municipally?
So what happened was I lost that election in 94 by 72 votes. And that was before Harris was elected. He was elected in 95. And right. So then what happened was I was really thrown into the AntiHarris opposition. I mean, I became involved with a former radical mayor of Toronto, John Sewell. We together formed and led a group called Citizens for Local Democracy, and we were fighting the amalgamation of the city of Toronto. At the same time, I started a group with some other moms, kitchen table activism, called Metro Parent Network, and we were fighting against the cuts to the school board. And all of that work really took from 95 through till 2000, when I again ran for school board. And through that time, I'd been building relationships with education unions, with activists in healthcare, with municipal activists and municipal councillors, provincial members of the legislature. And then in 2000, I ran for the school board again because I decided that I needed that platform. I had tried in 99 to get a nomination to the provincial party, the Liberal Party. That didn't work out. And so I ran for the school board in 2000. And then it was in 2003 that we finally defeated Mike Harris, and I was a member of the provincial government at that point. So I had one term as a school board trustee. And in that term, Joanne, we, as a school board, I don't know if you remember this, you would have gone on to whatever was next after OIC, but we defied the provincial government. We refused to balance the budget, and we were taken over by the provincial government. There was a supervisor sent in. So it was an act of civil disobedience on the part of the school board, or at least a majority of the school board. And that started my profile as sort of a spokesperson for this opposition to the cuts that Mike Harris was making, and the destruction of the relationship between the provincial government, who is the funder of publicly funded education, and the frontline workers and the parents.
I always felt that, I think it was under Mike Harris, I believe, that he disjointed the union, meaning he took principals and vice principals out of the union. And I remember when I did my undergrad in political science, and I did a master's in political science as well. And when I was working on my thesis, it was about teachers unions, but sort of from an international scope. And I looked at a lot of the media stuff that Mike Harris had done, and then the move, which I think was devious but unfortunately very smart, to separate those two bodies, was probably the single most destructive and intelligent way to start dismantling sort of that kind of consistency and that kind of activism that was going to come from a school. Because if I can separate management from teacher, if I can put them on opposite sides of that table, oh, I've done a really nice job. And then they move them around all the time.
Well, and you're so right, and you're so insightful. Not many people get that. And I have said that so many times, that was the single most destructive thing that he could have done to the cohesion of the school. And so it did a whole lot of things. It meant that different people were aspiring to be principals and vice principals, because in the time that my kids are just a little bit older than you. My youngest is about your age, but so they were going through the system at the same time. And when the teachers were in the same union as the principals and the vice principals, there was a common cause in every school in the province. There wasn't a differentiation, and so teachers would see themselves as principals. And in fact, at the time that Harris came in, there was a conversation in the Toronto District School Board, at the Toronto Board of Education, the old Toronto Board of Education, where we were talking about, what would it be like if principals and vice principals actually cycled through the role and went back into the classroom, so that they would reconnect with kids. And so what Harris did was he absolutely stopped that whole conversation and took it in entirely different direction. But here's the interesting thing from my perspective, Joanne. So I became the Minister of Education in 2006. I spent 3 years as a backbencher, and then the Premier, who was Dalton McGuinty at the time and very committed to publicly funded education, he made me the Minister of Education. And one of the first things that I did was I said to my team, I want to see if we can undo this. If we can talk to both the teachers and the principals council, and if we can undo this, because I would have been willing to make the case with my caucus and with the premier that was something that we should undo.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is that neither side wanted to do it,
No,
because
of course
there was already so much rancor that had developed in those few years, and the people who were in the principals and vice principals ranks, they didn't want to go backwards, and the teachers were already mad. So, it was really hard for me to swallow that we couldn't undo that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a political learning for me, that it's really, really hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Well, it's a unfortunate but very common principle of divide and conquer.
Yeah.
You make one smaller group feel more powerful and more important
Mm.
than the larger group. And I have all the respect in the world for principals and vice principals, but the teachers are in the classroom. If you can't connect with the teacher, you can't connect with the kid anymore.
Right.
That's doing a disservice to education. Period. But he
Right.
didn't care about
Right.
that. He
No.
cared about weakening the union because he could already see it kind of fracture. There were already, look, unions have implicit problems anyway, right? You have people that think they're good workers and people that are just taking advantage of the system,
Yeah.
and they and them and my dues. And he just played right into that
Absolutely.
to try to at least drive that wedge. And once it's driven, once you create sort of an upper class within that same school, they're not going back. No, no,
But
no.
what shocked me was that it was such a short period of time, because he only did it, I guess he did it 97, 98, something like that. And I'm talking about 2006. So it wasn't like it had been 20 years. It was a few
No.
years, but it was long enough for exactly what you're saying to have set in. And it was very disheartening. It was the same thing with the Toronto District School Board. I would have been willing to make the case that we should cut the school board in half, or we should try to undo the amalgamation. But the school trustees, many of whom had said to me, and had been my colleagues, that had said to me that they wanted the school board reduced in size. They didn't want to go backwards either. So, and I know going backwards is tough, but I sort of saw it as, okay, let's evolve this into something that's better and smaller, because the Toronto District School Board is a huge, huge board. It's the biggest board in the country, fifth biggest on the continent, I think.
Right.
So it makes sense that it would be smaller, but I couldn't undo either of those things, and I certainly wasn't willing to take the heat from both sides for doing
Right.
something.
Oh, there it is,
I
right?
needed an ally. I needed somebody to be on side.
Oh. And here we come. I'm going to fight the urge to jump all over the place here, because I just have like so many thoughts in my head and so many things I want to talk to you about. Because this is the thing, right? Is that I have a very, and it's American, but I have a very, or a favorite political quote. It's a Lincoln quote. It says, "I like to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky." And the reason why I like that quote so much, and not because I love Lincoln or because I'm religious, but because he says something that is fundamentally true, and I think fundamentally the most problematic thing in politics or in life in general is the notion that we know what's right.
Mm-hmm.
We know what needs to be done. We know what should be done. But in order to get support, we gotta water it down. We gotta change it a little bit. We gotta pull back here. How many times do you feel as though you had to just get Kentucky?
Oh man.
All the time.
I think all the time. I mean, you have to search for who's on side with this. Now, sometimes those people present themselves. So if I think about when I was premier and we were looking at raising the minimum wage or putting the basic income pilot in place, there was a groundswell of support for those things. So I didn't have to look very far for Kentucky,
Right.
But there were lots of moments, like when we were changing the sexual harassment policy in Ontario. It wasn't that it was hard to find a support group, but it was just that it's not something we had run on. It was something that came out of a teachable moment. We had whether it was Weinstein in the States or
Right.
Jian Ghomeshi here, and I wanted to do something. And
Yeah.
so when something comes out of the blue, you have to build a bit of a coalition around making something happen. So
Right.
um, it's a constant quest for where's the support for this? How can I move this forward? Because you're constantly persuading people to get on side, whether it's fellow caucus members or whether
Mhm.
it's the bureaucracy or whether it's the public. And to your point about we know what should be done, that we is that's a big question mark,
Yeah.
because you and I may share a worldview and we may agree on a lot of what needs to be done. But if you look at what's going on in politics today, somebody like Pierre Poilievre, who is running for the leadership of the Canadian Conservative Party, he does not share the same worldview as I do. So what he believes needs to be done is not what I believe needs to be done. And I think that's a huge political reality for us in Canada and in the United States right now.
Do you think that whether it's him or not, but do you think that an individual like him, or if we're talking about the States, somebody like Trump,
Oh,
or
yeah.
somebody like, going through all of those different, do you think that they're playing on divisions to gain popularity and gain votes? Or do you really think this is his fundamental belief? I probably would respect him more if I thought that, but I don't buy it. I don't buy that's his fundamental core belief. I think he saw an opportunity. I think he likes to get Kentucky.
Yeah.
And so he's going to play on that and magnify it.
Yeah. So I think they're a bit different, I mean, obviously I don't know Donald Trump, but watching him, I actually think he's a bit more of an opportunist than somebody like Pierre Poilievre. I
Hmm.
actually think a guy like Pierre Poilievre, who we will remark has been in politics from the time he was a young man. That's
Very
all
little.
he's
Yes.
ever done. He
Yes.
hasn't done anything else. And so I think he is a dyed in the wool, right wing, small government politician. And so, yes, I think he is playing on divisions. And I think
Mhm.
he is to some extent using those divisions in a way that magnifies his actual beliefs. But I don't think the magnification actually takes away from his core belief set, which
Right.
is that no government is good government. That basically we
Which
don't
is,
need the Bank of Canada, we don't need government, and we don't need politicians, even though he has been a politician his whole life. The contradictions are just rich.
I've always found the fundamental flaw in conservatism, and I always say that word wrong. I think I choke on it a little bit here. The fundamental flaw is, and I'm not talking about just the Conservative Party. I'm talking about big, little c, kind of like
Mhm.
broad base. This notion that tradition and whatever religious premise, whatever country you happen to be in, is our core value, and somehow, because the foundation of those principles are, we're not good people, we're
Right,
bad people,
right.
we're
We're born
immoral,
bad. Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
shouldn't have freedom because we're going to screw it up. and and then it somehow switches to less government.
Yeah.
Is astounding, because if we are fundamentally bad people, then government is made up of fundamentally bad people.
Hmm.
It's like, who's leading the disaster, right?
Yeah.
Because I think foundationally liberals believe, and again, we're not just talking political parties, individual parties, the notion that people are fundamentally good, we're going to make some mistakes, we should have as much freedom as we possibly can have until my freedom hurts your freedom.
Hmm.
And we should go like that, because that's how we're going to have progress, that's how we're going to have all of those things. But we are putting faith in people, not institutions of tradition and history. And I can't get around the inherent contradictions of conservative governments.
Well, and what's interesting is because you're right about the freedoms, that I think there is a belief that we're fundamentally flawed, we're out for ourselves, we're mean,
Right.
nasty people. human beings are, and that we need the freedom to be that. And it's so interesting that the cri de coeur for the convoy in Ottawa was freedom, that somehow freedoms were being curtailed because people were being asked to have a vaccination or they were being asked to wear a mask. And, underlying that is such a disaffection with our society that's what makes it scary to me. And that's what makes him scary. And I believe he's a very dangerous man in Canadian politics.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. I mean, I can't even say the word freedom anymore without, it doesn't mean the same thing anymore.
Yeah.
I can't say the words freedom. It has been so mutated and tarnished by the right in the United States and up here and the Freedom Convoy and all of that kind of thing. It doesn't even mean the same thing anymore. So they've bent it and mutated it in order
like our
to
flag. Like our flag.
Oh, I
I
can't.
never thought I would see the day when I would be afraid of a truck with two flags on it.
Listen, right away, and I know this is horribly stereotypical, but right away, you have something attached to the back of your truck, I'm thinking we're not going to get along very well. And forget the people that have the F Trudeau on their flag or have their kid holding it like it's some sort of badge of honor. But see,
yeah. Well, I was just going to say, as I have the same reaction, and I think it's something that we have to fight against. I think we have to understand. And I'm talking to myself now. I have to understand that person driving that truck has a right to his or her expression of, opinion, is probably angry about a whole lot of things that are going on in his or her life. And I don't know that person. So I have to try really hard not to prejudge, but I'm confessing to you that I have a momentary sharp intake of breath because I think this person, and I have the added thing of this person's going to recognize me. So this person's going to look at me and is going to say, oh, that's that Kathleen Wynne. And I hate her because in the election in 2018, when I lost so badly, and I take responsibility for that, a lot of it came down to people saying that they hated me, the vast majority of whom had never met me or had never spoken to me, but they had decided they hated me. And so to this day, I am a little on guard when I go into public spaces, just for a moment, just until I make sure that I know what's going to come at me, because I'll take whatever's coming at me. I've taken lots of crap, and that's fine. I just want to know whether it's going to come or not.
Let's talk about the crap you've taken for a minute. Because I think, again, and I know I'm jumping all over the place here, but I've looked at your record. I've been an adult throughout your entire, office terms, both, as a backbencher and as premier. And when I look at the analytics, when I look at all those markers that strategists and economists and whoever like to look at, you're kicking butt, right? Like, you look at the objective facts about how Ontario was doing, and you are doing, all of those markers are off the charts, and nobody can argue that. How much, and you talk about people hating you, I don't even know, how much do you think it rested on your shoulders in that kind of personalized way? Because let's be honest, being a woman and being gay in 2000, it's not easy today, but we've come a long way. But in that time, how much do you think you were carrying on the basis of those facts that had nothing to do with your job in office?
So I think when I said when I lost in 18 so badly and I take responsibility for it, I recognize that there was a whole lot going on. There was the fact that our government had been in office for 15 years. We'd been there since 2003. there was the fact that, I had taken over from Premier McGuinty, and there had been stuff that our government, because I was part of that government, there was stuff that we had done. We'd been through an economic downturn, but as you say, the markers were very good. We had the lowest unemployment rate in the OECD, in 2018. Like we had done really, really well. But we were an old government, like we'd been there for a long time. And so I think on top of that, when you put the fact that I was a woman and I was a lesbian and I had made some very, I made at least one very, very unpopular decision with people who had supported me, and that was the partial sell-off of a public asset, Hydro One, the transmission grid, part of the transmission grid. All of those things came together. And we know from our polling that although people in Ontario weren't coming out and saying, I don't like her because she's a woman, I don't like her because she's a lesbian, they weren't saying that, but there was a kind of inchoate, unarticulated, I just don't like her.
There's a feeling, yeah.
Right. And we think that's where the homophobia and the misogyny resided. And we'll never know that for sure, Joanne, but I just don't believe that we would have lost that badly if there hadn't been some of that. And every campaign I fought, from the time I ran in 1994 through till my last election in 2018, there was a homophobic undercurrent. There were, whether there were flyers or whether there was a whisper campaign, it was always present in my campaign. Sure. So I'm not under any illusion that homophobia wasn't part of the mix.
Well, and I mean, homophobia and very, very, very interconnected. A lot of people don't see how connected homophobia and sexism are, but very much interconnected is that element. And I think a lot of, female politicians are constantly dealing with it. I mean, I have a very, very clear memory of listening way back when to Kim Campbell speak, who I, again, I, my party loyalty is pretty clear, but she was charismatic.
Yeah.
She was intelligent. She was articulate, and I was a little blown away, because I saw her speak in person. And when I remember seeing, those ads that said things like, if she can't keep a family together, how can she keep a country together? And that's not ancient history, right? Yeah. That's front and center. Now, did I think the conservatives knew they were going to lose? 100%. They put her in that boat, watched her go downhill so they could say, look, we tried to have a woman. It just didn't play out. It didn't work for us, and we won't have one for a very long time.
And that's such a common story. There's a podcast that I think you may have listened to called No Second Chances. Certainly, right. Your listeners might be interested in it. So it's a series of episodes that brought together all of the women in this country. We're all still alive who have been first ministers. So Kim Campbell, plus all of the women who have been premiers in this country. Not a single one yet has been reelected to a majority government. Many of us have been elected. So I was appointed, I became the leader in 2013, but I won an election in my own right in 2014, but wasn't reelected. Christy Clark was reelected in British Columbia, but she was reelected with a minority and lost government within a few days. So, right. So that reality of coming in when a party is in trouble, that notion that, well, we'll try this because what have we got to lose? Right? And then you fall off the cliff. That is a very, very common experience. We're waiting now to see, I think, if Rachel Notley, who was the NDP premier in Alberta, whether she will be reelected now that the Conservative leader, Jason Kenney, has stepped down. And I think she's got a good shot at it, but we'll see. Because
I'm worried. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not
right.
Yeah.
The wild rose. I can't decide. I can't figure that province out, to be honest. I speak to a lot of people from Alberta all the time who are like, it's horrible here. It's horrible here. I'm like, who's voting? Who's in charge of that province? Yeah. Who's taking it that way so far? Because I think a really important, so you talked about selling off Hydro One. Do you regret it? Or did it have to be done?
4 years ago, I would have said it had to be done. I certainly regret the way it unfolded,
Right.
and would I do it differently? I certainly think I would go through that whole process differently.
Right.
I would try to bring people along with me. I would try to bring people along so that they would understand better why we needed to build new assets, because that was all it was about. For me, it was not about taking that money and that $5 billion or $9 billion and putting it to our bottom line. It was about building transit. I'd made a commitment to build transit, and we needed money to leverage our borrowing against, because we were running out of borrowing room,
Right.
and the bond agencies weren't going to give us a decent rating. So we needed some liquidity, and I wasn't selling off the generation of power. It wasn't, Niagara Falls. It was the transmission, which was already partially privatized. But you see, that's a policy wonkish conversation, and it was not easy to explain, and people didn't buy it.
Well,
So
there.
I'd
No,
love a shot at it again. That's my
well,
bottom line.
I I think you tapped into something that's incredibly important because and it's going to get into something else that I think is our fundamental problem is that you just took a couple of minutes to describe a very 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 complicated issue. You talk about being liquid, you talk about bond agencies giving us ratings, you talk about something and a structure that, let's say, 75% of voting Canadians don't have
Right.
the educational background or the time. I'm not saying they're not intelligent
Or
enough, but
the
the
interest. They
time
may not have the interest either.
to really get it, right? But what they do get is when somebody simplifies it to, unfortunately, and I call it stupidity because I do think it's that kind of level. They simplify it to a stupidity kind of level. So you can point a finger and say, she did this, she sold it, now this is going up, and that's where it's going. And it's so easy to simplify, and people walk away from the issue thinking they have a handle on it. And I honestly believe, because I look at Pierre and I look at Ford, because
Mhm.
Ford's mastered the art, right? I don't know. That I can't believe I said that in the same sentence, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He's mastered the art of oversimplifying things to the point where people think they get it. They don't, but
Well,
he's
and
simplified it.
yeah, and it's, what I would argue, it's more than simplification, oversimplification, because what happened in the case of Hydro One, yes, it was oversimplified, but it was also misconstrued. I'm not
Oh,
going to say
100%.
anybody lied, but it was a misconstrued kind of conflation of issues. So the notion that our um, broadening the ownership or privatizing part of Hydro One and increased electricity prices, those things are not related, but they were pushed together by
Yes,
the
they were.
opposition, and people bought it because electricity prices were going up. They were going up because we'd made a huge investment in infrastructure across the province. We'd literally rebuilt thousands of kilometers of line, because we'd had brownouts and blackouts in the previous years. Anyway, it's what you're saying. It is an oversimplification, and it tips into a misconstrued
Of course it
story.
does.
Yeah.
But that's the point. The point is to
Yeah.
simplify and then push it one way, right? 100% that's the point. And I think, we're seeing it happen all over the place. You see it happen with Biden, you see it happen with Trudeau. And more and more and more, we are blaming our provincial leaders, our federal leaders, for things that aren't in your control,
Hmm.
right? We
Hmm.
talk about gas prices.
Yeah.
I'm so tired of talking about
Yeah.
gas prices as though the Keystone Pipeline would have fixed everything. I'm like, what? That doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. It wouldn't have been built, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And if you want to talk about fixing gas and fixing our reliance on foreign supplies, oh my, we got to go back to 1970. What, 3 was OPEC?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
we got to go way back. And then we got to blame every subsequent
Yeah.
government since then that didn't invest heavily, if that's the way we want it to go. But again, people are just looking for somebody to go, it's them. So it's them.
And we're desperate in this country because we have such a fossil fuel based economy in the West. we're desperate to find a scapegoat, you know,
Right.
because the hard work of making the transition off fossil fuels is just that. It's really hard work, and nobody really knows how to do it. And you know, we have to tackle it because, you know, if we are going to meet our targets, and if we want to be part of an international movement to you know, to actually deal with climate change, then we've got to support Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland. We've got to support those people as
Mhm.
they transition into a different economy. But
Right.
that's a tough conversation. It's very tough
And and here's where it gets really messy. It's an expensive one.
and very expensive.
It's
Exactly.
very
That's why
expensive.
it's
So
tough.
you know, and at the end of the day, what people are dying to hear, which is why guys like Ford got elected, and heaven help us twice, because he looks you dead in the face and says what people want to hear,
Yeah.
which has always been my frustrating point, which is why I don't know if I could ever step into the ring. Don't worry, you're
Yeah.
not going to have to pay a dollar more,
Yeah.
but everything's going to get better. Don't worry, I'm going to fix education and healthcare, but your taxes aren't going up.
In fact,
Forget
they're
about
going down. In
yeah,
fact,
that's even better.
they're going down, and that is such a deception because, you know, I'm going to send you
Oh,
$350 for your val
seriously.
tag from your license plate sticker, and that's going to take $1 billion out of the treasury. Well, and you know what that does? $1 billion a year. That means there's a whole lot of stuff you can't do in education, for example.
I don't even, first of all, it wasn't just the billion because he gave me 3 years of it.
Right.
He
Right.
gave me back pay.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is how people can, it seems like a bot, but again, it's a bit of a bribe, right? Here's your $300. Please vote for me. What I don't understand fundamentally is how anybody rationally can think, I'm going to take a billion every year out of your budget and we're going to be better off. My healthcare and education is going to be fine. I don't understand how anybody could rationally believe that, because then I start having to blame us. And I say this all the time. The people are so quick to blame politicians, and they said this and they said that and they lied and they didn't do what they said they were going to do. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. But if you are going to allow yourself to believe in Santa Claus,
Mhm.
I think as an adult, you're going to have to carry a bit of that weight.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's the frustrating part, because when people say, Joanna, why don't you do it? I said, because I'd have to look people dead in their face and say, you want better social services? You're going to have to pay.
Mhm.
Pure and simple. The education system's falling apart, if not fallen. The healthcare system, my mom was a nurse, well, for 60 years. And to watch the destruction of that system
Mhm.
is ridiculous. To
Mhm.
watch how they've manipulated nurses and RPNs and RNAs in order to save money, and it's mind-boggling. But unless you're in it, you don't talk
Mhm.
about it, and unless you get sick, you don't care.
Right. Right. And people in their day-to-day lives, I mean, this is something I've learned over my time in politics. You know, I've knocked on thousands and thousands of doors in my own riding, but in places all over the province. And people, as you said before, I would say even more. I'd say like 90% of people, not 75, but 90% of people have their own preoccupations.
Of course they
They're
do.
concerned about, you know, buying their kids clothes and getting groceries on the table. And right now, they're really worried about that, you know,
Yeah.
buying a home, finding some place to live. Those are the things that people worry about on a day to day basis. So I understand why a politician, a populist politician like Doug Ford, wants to give you $300. Like, I
Mhm.
understand why he
Mhm.
wants to do that. I just think that that kind of short sighted policy hurts people in the long run more than it helps them. But that's a very hard thing to explain to someone who is trying to feed their kids. And that $300 makes a difference, you know? So finding the balance between how do I help you with your immediate concerns today,
Mhm.
as opposed to, you know, the long-term needs of our society. I mean, that's what we grapple with all the time,
And I
constantly.
Yeah, I think also having your term limit, right? So like we talk about big things like transformation in education and healthcare. That's not going to happen in 5 years,
Mm-mm.
4 years. That's not going to happen. Yeah, I'm going to take billions of dollars, but you're not going to see that. You can't see it in that short of time, right? The environment, the reason why nothing significant, really significant, is happening is because I could spend hundreds of billions of dollars and we're not going to see the impact for 20 years.
Yeah.
Quite literally. I don't even think I'm being,
No,
that
that's
facetious
right.
there. You're not going to see it for that length of time. So while I'm taking your money that you need to get your kids clothes and whatever, and I know in 20 years, your kids are going to you're not going to make it through that time period, right? You're not going to reelect me because you're just going to be upset I took your money and there's nothing to show for it
Yeah.
instantaneously.
And that's the problem, that is the problem with long-term policy. But there are some things like when Dalton McGuinty shut down the gas-fired plants, and we saw smog days basically disappear in Ontario. There are things that can be done that
Yeah, of
do displace workers, those gas plants, there were workers associated with those gas plants.
course.
But, we tried to create a green energy economy. Um, and so what we have to do is we have to look for those things. We have to look for things that have the big impact. And then we have to hope that there's enough of a consensus in the population that those things don't get undone. Now, with the gas plants, they didn't get undone. Those gas plants were shut down.
Right.
Not gas plants, sorry,
Cool. I know
the
what you meant.
coal-fired
Yeah, yeah,
plants.
yeah.
Sorry. The gas plants was another issue. The coal-fired plants were shut down. But when we and there was a lot of consensus around that, people were ecstatic. But when we put a cap and trade system in place and we joined with Quebec and with California to reduce our emissions, people didn't understand that. And that was, that's on us that we weren't able to explain it better. And it just seemed like it was a sort of pie in the sky. And so when Doug Ford came in, even though our emissions were going down because those big emitters had to pay,
Mm-hmm.
Doug Ford canceled it. And so those are two, the shutting down of the coal-fired plants and cap and trade. They're two good examples of really different policies that one that took hold and people could see an immediate result, and another was more like what you're talking about, long term,
Yeah.
that people didn't understand, and so they didn't care when Doug Ford came in and canceled it.
Right. Right. It's incredibly frustrating to watch that happen, and to watch people buy in, and somehow, like I'm astounded at this last election. I don't know what to say about the voting turnout.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I unfortunately I do know what to say. I don't know what to say about the voting turnout, and I sure as heck don't know what to say about obviously our system of democracy,
Mm-hmm.
our first past the post system. For those who don't understand that, the notion that the popular vote doesn't very rarely equates to seats earned in the House, which is obviously problematic, because Doug Ford, I think, got 17% of the popular vote in Ontario. I might be off a little bit if they've done some more math. Yet a significant majority of seats
Right.
in the legislature.
Right.
So we have a problem. We have a big problem there. And I think the primary problem, and I was talking about this the other day, is I think people are starved for authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that, everybody's seen you're supposed to wear the right suit and roll your sleeves up at the right
Mm-hmm.
time and have your shoes new, but not too new. All of
Yeah.
those kind of,
Yeah.
you have handlers, you have people, you have other people writing your speeches, you have people telling you what to wear, where to go, how to wear your hair. Like women have a whole other
There's a
level
whole
of
other layer. Yeah. Yeah.
expectation. And then now people aren't buying it. And when you're not polished, so when you step into like a Doug Ford or a Trump for that matter, because I think Trump was purposefully, unfortunately, not polished.
Yeah.
People mistake simplicity and stupidity, and I use that word purposefully. They mistake those for authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
mistake his I just love the egg sandwich from Tim Hortons as an actual personality trait,
Yeah.
because all they want to do is have a politician speak, let's say, their language, and stop rolling up your sleeves, or get off the teleprompter for them. You know what I mean? They're so starved for that.
But
We're
it's so
starting to
interesting. It's so interesting, you know. So Doug Ford, he used a teleprompter more than any other politician I've ever seen. He used a teleprompter at every single press conference that he did during COVID.
right.
I never ever had a teleprompter at a press conference. I had teleprompters when I was making big speeches, for sure,
Mhm.
that,
Sure.
you know, that I'd worked on, or my team had worked on, but and in a huge room. But I did not have a teleprompter when I was doing scrums with the media. No way. I never would have done that.
But do you
So
see the problem?
yeah,
You're refined, you're articulate, you know what you're speaking about, and people don't trust that
I
anymore.
know.
They trust a guy that can barely read a teleprompter.
Yeah. I
He
mean
thinks
that.
it's real.
Yeah, that folksy approach appeals to people. And I would also say, just to go back to an earlier conversation we were having, I think that there are mannerisms and sort of, I don't know, I don't even know what it is, characteristics that men can
100%.
do and take on. There are ways men can be that
Mhm.
would be not available to a woman.
Right.
So, you know, patting people on the back and being a little bit jocular, you know, that doesn't fly with
No.
for a woman to do, you know. Yes, you have to have a sense of humor, but it's very different than that old boy kind of slap you on the back, hail fellow, well met. And that's a whole area of interaction that's not available to women. And I'm not
Mhm.
complaining about it. It's just a reality. And
Mhm.
so Doug Ford being kind of bumbly and kind of, you know, inept, that would not, nobody would have accepted that from me. You
No.
know, they would have, because they already think I'm not qualified. And then if I can't perform, it would have been a real problem. So I'm not saying I got the authenticity thing right, because I don't think I did. I think you know, I
Well,
actually was being myself, but it didn't fly, you know?
here's the problem, though. Authenticity is also a level of honesty I don't think the public affords politicians, Doug
Hmm.
Ford or anybody. Or,
Hmm.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I just the authentically, truthfully, I can't cut your taxes and give you better health care.
Right.
True. That's true. That
Yeah.
is just
Yeah.
truth. Any other incarnation of that is bullcrap, is manipulation. And I just think that we're,
Yeah.
we're so starved.
Yeah. So what I really wanted to find a way to say about healthcare was that we have got to have a serious conversation in this country about what the healthcare system can cover and what it can't cover.
Mhm.
Because in 1969, when I was a
You
kid
paid.
and this started, and my dad was a doctor,
Hmm.
people had private insurance before we had Medicare. People had private insurance, and people fell through the cracks. So my dad was very supportive of um, publicly funded healthcare.
Universal, yeah.
But, but then there was not the technology, there were not the procedures, there was not the scope of what we were paying for was so much narrower. And your
Hmm.
mom would, she would know this as well. The expectations of the healthcare system have just expanded and expanded and expanded to the point where we have got, I think, unrealistic expectations about what our healthcare system can do. And I think
Hmm.
one of the prime examples of that is in long-term care. um,
Yeah.
we are just not going to be able to pay for everything that every senior wants and needs. And we're going to have to find a way to find housing that is more rational, that supports from the community, that supports family, because all of those players have to be involved. And yet, as we went through COVID, there started to be this notion that we just have to put more money into long-term care and build more long-term care beds, and that's going to solve the problem. It's not going to solve the problem, because that's not where seniors want to be. They don't want to be in long-term care, and that's not where families want to put them. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But
I love it though. It's important. It's hugely important though.
And it's one of those things that it's really hard to find a way to stand at a podium and say that, but that's what has to be said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's so funny going back to education, because I mean, I've been a teacher for 20 years and I always circle back to education. We want to start talking about healthcare. Why the hell is gym not mandatory?
Yeah. Well, we
Why?
tried with PDA, right?
Listen, just so you know, my school still teaches your sex ed curriculum, because I'll be damned if I'm going back to 1998. Now, here's the funny part. I don't know if you know this about me. I do teach at a private school.
I didn't know that.
It's a unique alternative private school. So it's not, I don't think I would do well with the suit and the tie. Well, I know I wouldn't. But the reason being is because I didn't think I could do a good job teaching 30 grade 7s or 30 grade 8s. I think it's asinine. You manage that classroom. You don't teach that classroom. And I think the broken parts of education, when people talk about education, they talk about all these other stuff. It really does come down to one thing. We have amazing teachers. They're amazing educators. They're innovative. Most of them are paying for stuff out of their own pocket. But if you think they can teach 25, 30 kids with 5 kids on this learning platform and 5 kids on this learning platform and do it successfully and inspire and support, you're insane. You're insane. It can't happen. And then you have people, which I thought was a pretty big misstep on Del Duca's part, is this notion about bringing back grade 13. I'm like, what do you, don't say that. Everybody doesn't want more money in education. You're going to add another layer to education. We need, or else say he'll lower class sizes. But I know people that are like, where do we put the kids? We don't have any more class spaces, right? We've shut down schools. We've amalgamated over here. We've shut down. So now you're making promises that seem like they're supporting education, but educators know you can't facilitate that. We don't have the infrastructure to do that. And so now everybody's like, well, wait a minute. I don't know what we're doing here.
But here's the thing, Joanne, here's the thing. When we came into office in 2003, there were a lot of the same arguments about full day kindergarten. And, we don't have the space. How are we going to get the space? And there were arguments about lowering the class sizes in primary. And the fact is we built more space. So yeah, we closed schools and we consolidated schools, but we net built 800 schools. There was a huge amount of money put into building schools. And in the campaign, and this got lost, Del Duca basically said, we're going to take the $10 billion that Doug Ford is saying we're going to build Highway 413, and we're going to put it into education infrastructure, because we know we need more space. The grade 13 was a temporary and optional way of helping kids who are falling through the cracks. And I was knocking on doors during the election, and there were a lot of kids actually who said that's a good idea, because remember, there are kids who go back for a victory lap now. All that we were saying was, the government's going to fund those credits, because right now you have to have 30 credits. You can take 34 credits and the government will fund those credits. But after 34, the school board has to fund them. So all we were saying was, we are actually going to, if we're elected as Liberals, we're actually going to fund kids to come back for a full victory lap.
You know what? I'm a teacher. I'm in politics. And I didn't get that message.
I know.
There it is.
Explained.
Right? There it is. Like, what a beautiful way to explain it. And maybe it did get explained at a press conference I never saw. I never thought that he got nearly enough coverage.
It didn't actually get explained like that at a press conference. It should have. It got explained door by door. And that was one of my frustrations, was that we didn't have a policy discussion about anything in this election. right?
Yeah.
It was just, it was Doug Ford getting it done. Well, what's it? Getting what
Yeah.
done, right? Just building a road. That's all the election was about in terms of policy.
I don't
Anyway,
understand.
I
I
could go
don't.
on a very long time about this. So
But this is the important stuff, right?
yeah,
Because I think I look at the voting turnout. I remember going to vote that day, and I'm like, am I in the right place? Because there was
yeah,
nobody there. I
yeah,
literally thought, I checked my card. I'm like, did I read this wrong? And it's that kind of either apathy, which scares the heck out of me, or again, I'll vote simplistically. This guy says
mhm,
he's going to give me $300 back, or he's going to build some road so I don't have to sit in traffic. I don't even know where the 413 is. Most people, most people couldn't even pick out the road
yeah,
map, and yet it's still a thing. And I'm also looking at through pages and pages of people's complaints about either federal or provincial, and I
mhm,
think our government, we live in a very different world in the past, well, for a long time, but significantly in the past 10 to 20 years. The notion of globalization and the notion of interconnectivity of
mhm,
our economies throughout the world is so pervasive that the idea that a federal leader or a provincial leader can control the economy of
yeah,
their is it doesn't exist.
no.
It
But
doesn't exist.
politicians want to give the illusion that it does. So I want to go back to something you said, which I think is the most important part of this conversation, which is you saying that you're feeling like you're going to have to jump into an activist space that you
Hmm.
haven't necessarily been in before. And that's what I took from what you said because of
Sure.
what's going on. And
Yeah.
I think that whether you do that as an individual or not, your generation is very needed right now in terms of all those issues you've identified. The
Mhm.
apathy, the disengagement, the need for oversimplification or the desire for oversimplification. It's really important for people who care about the institutions that we've built over 150 years. Sorry,
Mhm.
that they get involved and that they take the reins. It's the passing of the torch. And
Mhm.
I feel like the reason I'm having conversations with people like you is that I want to be as helpful as I can in sharing my experience, not
Right.
because I think that I've got any particular wisdom to
Of course
share,
you do.
but I've got experience
Yeah.
and I want you to take what you need from it so that you can then save the world.
How very Buffy. Thank you so much. I know you have an hour, and I want to be very respectful of your time. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I would love it if you can make time in the future. I
Let's
would love
talk
to have you
again.
back on.
I'd love to do
And we can target specific things. There's a whole list I didn't get to today, but you are amazing. Thank you for your service, and thank you for spending the time with us and sharing
My
everything.
pleasure. I'd love to come back. It was a great conversation. So
Mhm.
let's do it again.
Thank you so much. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us. I'll see you next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat station. Dismissed.